So I'm going to ask you to just hold your shell
Recordings.
and let it speak to you a bit about the paradox of being whole and broken all at the same time, simultaneously. Just take a deep breath, let yourself be held by the chair. I was so amazed to realize, as much as I'd always heard and felt that the trees and chlorophyll make our oxygen, that the ocean makes a huge, huge portion of the oxygen on the planet. So I like to think that we're even breathing in a bit of ocean. We are most certainly breathing in the love, the prayers that have spun around and through this building and this land for so long. Hopes and dreams, beginnings, weddings and even baptisms, and endings as people have gone on and been here for their own memorial service. And in this space of endings and beginnings, of wholeness and brokenness, we are part of it, sometimes joyfully, sometimes sorrowfully, but we are whole, complete. As the shell in your hand, stronger. Stronger for having lived on this beautiful planet, being part of it, and letting ourselves be broken. Broken open to be more than we thought we could be. Another full deep breath. Bringing your awareness back to this place, this moment in time. Sounds of the music, sounds of the stream, sounds of the birds, reminding us just how blessed we are to be here, alive on this beautiful planet. Peace. Amen. So the shells and the trip to the ocean and the walk on the beach started all this. And as I realized it was going to be something I got to share on Memorial Day, and was kind of finding my way through that, Crow reminded me Memorial Day is not just about war. It's also about peace. And we can focus on what it is that we want to memorialize. Certainly the people and the opportunities of our world and our life that we are part of are a sweet, sweet part of it. And that's part of how the beach came to be with you today. We were walking on St. George Island, which is in the Apalachicola Bay. The waters there are fairly shallow. And St. George Island is a little barrier island, and it has been both developed and beautifully protected. There's over 4 miles of beach with no buildings of any type that you can see from right there, and the shelling is fabulous. But the dunes and the trees, the different ones that have learned to grow in such a harsh environment, full hot sun and the salt and the incredible winds that they have there, require specific growth strengths. So I just fell in love with it, and I definitely would recommend it for anybody who needs some quality beach time. It's not that far away. It's down just east of, just east of Panama City. There's a real opportunity to really be humbled in that environment, where we get to feeling like we know what's going on. Been on the planet 40, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever. We feel like we've got a sense of it. But there's also that place that the longer we're here, the more we realize we don't know, and the more we realize how small we are. And it's, again, that paradox of being significant in that we have unique gifts that have never been given quite the same way we can give them, and also incredibly insignificant in the smallness of our part. So I think that all of those are places that just contribute to the complexity of our humanness. And I like all of those places. Initially, I found myself looking for the perfect unblemished shells that are so hard to find, but as we walked, I found myself drawn to the beauty of the large ones that were broken. No matter how chipped or broken they were, their colors captivated me. I carried them back to our campsite, where I arranged them into a mandala that seemed to become richer every time I looked at it. The broken shells were somehow not as significant alone as they were when they were combined with the others. And I wonder if you've seen that too. Maybe a friend with some difficult life challenge that finds strength and courage in a support group. They come in, the people that I've known who've been involved in 12 Steps group often began going because their situation left them feeling too broken to navigate life. But once they found a strong community, a support group that wouldn't judge them, they became strong enough to help others. I tend to think of that as a broken shell that is strong still. I've heard that referred to as a wounded healer, and I think that's a powerful phrase. A look at the self-help book section of a bookstore or library will reveal that many, possibly most of them, are written by people who've experienced major traumas, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, and found their own unique way to recover. While I'm reluctant to claim that being broken in some way is necessary to realizing our deepest potentials, I do believe that the divine spark in each of us offers unlimited possibilities for healing. One example is a remarkable man that has probably touched many of your lives, whether you knew him as Richard Alpert or as Ram Dass. He wrote the book Be Here Now in the 70s, and among many other ideas, it called us to be more present and conscious in our choices, introducing countless people to meditation and yoga. When he experienced a major stroke in his 60s that left him completely dependent on others, he came to see even that as a gift, to show him how to receive love as freely as he had given it. A powerful documentary of this difficult time was aired, I think, on PBS as Fierce Grace. I think they have it in the library. And he went on to write another book, still here, as a guide to navigating the challenges of a severely compromised body while maintaining the strength of our spirit. Yet another story of a broken but transformed body is told by Matthew Sanford. I've got his book over there if anybody wants to borrow it for the week. He was 13 when the car that he and his family were traveling in left the road and took his father's life, his sister's, and left him as a paraplegic. Through the support of a strong mother and brother who survived, and with a very strong spirit of his own, he was able to do the emotional and physical work necessary to reclaim his wholeness, in time becoming a yogi, a widely respected yogi, who continues to teach by example that we don't have to be diminished by our bodies or our life circumstances. There are countless stories of people of all ages who rise above brokenness of all types. I imagine many of you have your own stories that inspire and strengthen you when life gets overwhelming. I also believe there are cultural and societal standards that create major breaks or disconnects, if you will, in our emotional body that are so common we are often unaware of them. My father was raised as one of 7 children to poor mountain parents in the early 1900s. If you've ever taken a walk through an old cemetery, you'll recognize that there are often small headstones from children. It was not unusual for a family to use 1 or 2 children or in those days. And I suspect, particularly among the poor, that there was little time for grieving. I do not know what age my dad was when he lost 2 of his siblings. I only know that he was totally unable to mourn the loss of my brother's 7-day-old daughter. His 60-year-old emotional wound deprived him of being able to feel the loss or to comfort his son. Undealt with brokenness compromises how we see our world. More and more stories of the vital importance of an aware, healthy, emotional body are surfacing throughout our culture. Books such as Molecules of Emotion by Dr. Candace Pert have pointed the way to a deeper understanding of just how deeply our emotional health reflects our mental and physical health. When we see teenagers taking their own lives out of despair or other lives out of anger, we must admit as a society that we have been blind to the depth of emotional wounding that we have become accustomed to. When a situation is simply too much to comprehend, when there is no way to make sense of it, returning or maybe surrendering to the wisdom of our hearts is where we can find a way forward. I have been healed and nourished many times over by Rachel Naomi Remen's stories, and I'd like to share one brief one. One of my former patients, Josh, is a gifted cancer surgeon who had sought help because of depression. A highly disillusioned and cynical man, he was thinking about early retirement. He said, "I can barely make myself get out of bed most mornings. I hear the same complaints day after day. I see the same diseases over and over again. I just don't care anymore. I need a new life," he said. Yet, through his extraordinary skill, he had given just that to many hundreds of others. Proust said that the voyage of discovery lies not in seeking new vistas, but in having new eyes. New eyes can often be found in very simple ways. Drawing on the work of Angelis Arian, the author of The Fourfold Way, I sometimes suggest to people like Josh that they review the events of their day for 15 minutes every evening, asking themselves 3 questions and writing down the answers to these questions in a journal. The 3 questions are: what surprised me today? What moved me or touched me today? What inspired me today? Often these are busy people, and I tell them that they do not need to write a great deal. The key thing is in reliving their day from a new perspective, and not the amount that they write about it. I asked Josh if he would like to try this as an experiment. He was dubious. Less expensive than Prozac, I told him. He laughed and agreed to try. I was not surprised to hear from him in a few days. He sounded irritated on the phone. "Rachel," he said, "I have done this for 3 days and the answer is always the same. Nothing, nothing, and nothing. I don't like to fail at things. Is there a trick to this?" I laughed. "Perhaps you're still looking at your life in old ways," I told him. "Try looking at the people around you as if you were a novelist, a journalist, or maybe a poet. Look for the stories." There was a brief silence. "Right," he said, but he didn't call me back. Josh did not mention the journal again for several weeks. Our sessions focused on relieving some of his stress and reducing his workload a bit. He seemed to be getting better, and I was optimistic. But then 6 weeks after his phone call, he came in with a little bound book and began to tell me about what he thought was really helping him. He had trouble with the journal at the beginning and had wondered how he could be so busy and still be living such an empty life. But slowly, he had begun to find some answers to the 3 questions. He opened the journal and began to read some of them to me. At first, the most surprising thing in a day was that a cancer had grown or shrunk 2 or 3 millimeters. And the most inspiring thing was that a new or experimental drug had begun to work. But gradually, he had begun to see more deeply. Eventually, he saw people who had found their way through great pain and darkness by following a thread of love. People who had sacrificed parts of their bodies to affirm the value of being alive. People who had found ways to triumph over pain, suffering, and even death. I was deeply moved. In the beginning, he told me he would only notice the things that surprised him, moved him, or inspired him several hours after they happened in the evening in the privacy of his home. It was like one of those fairy tales, he said, like being under a spell. I could only see life by looking backwards over my shoulder. But gradually this lag time became shorter and shorter. I was building up a capacity I had never used, but I got better at it, he told me. Once I began to see things at the time they actually happened, a lot changed for me. I was puzzled. What do you mean? Well, he replied, at the beginning, I couldn't talk about it and I just wrote everything down, but I think when I began to see things differently, my attitude started to change. Maybe that showed in my tone of voice or in some other way, but people seemed to pick up on it because their attitudes seemed to change too. And after a while, I just began talking to people about more than their cancer and its treatment. I began talking about what I could see. The first patient we spoke to in this way was a 38-year-old woman with ovarian cancer who had undergone major abdominal surgery followed by a very debilitating chemotherapy. In the midst of a routine follow-up visit one morning, he suddenly saw her for the first time. Her 4-year-old on her lap and her 6-year-old leaning against her chair. Both little girls were shiny clean, well-fed, happy, and obviously well-loved. Aware of the profound suffering caused by her sort of chemotherapy, he was deeply moved by the depth of her commitment to mother her children, and for the first time, he connected it to her strength of her will to live. After they spoke of her symptoms, he had commented on this. "You are such a great mother to your kids," he told her. "Even after all you have been through, there is something very strong in you. I think that power could maybe heal you someday." She smiled at him, and he realized with a shock that he had never seen her smile before. "Thank you," she told him warmly. "That means a lot to me." He was very surprised at this, but he had believed her. Encouraged, he began to ask other people 1 or 2 questions that he had not been taught to ask in medical school. What has sustained you in dealing with this illness? Or where do you find your strength? And found that people with the same disease had very different things to say, things he really wanted to hear about. In some way, what they said was true for him too, as he struggled to deal with the difficulties of his own life. "I knew cancer very well, but I did not know people before," he told me. He has always been a superb surgeon whose outcome data are remarkable. But in the past few months, for the first time, people have begun to thank him for their surgery, and some have even given him gifts. He sat in silence for a few minutes, and then he reached into his pocket and brought out a beautiful stethoscope engraved with his name. "A patient gave me this," he said, obviously moved. I smiled at him. "And what do you do with that, Josh?" He looked at me, puzzled for a moment, and then he laughed out loud. "I listen to hearts, Rachel. I listen to hearts." Most of us lead far more meaningful lives than we know. Often, finding meaning is not about doing things differently. It is about seeing familiar things in new ways. When we find new eyes, the unexpected blessing in work we have done for many years may take us completely by surprise. We can see life in many ways with the eye, with the mind, with the intuition, but perhaps it is only by those who speak the language of meaning, who have remembered how to see with the heart, that life is ever deeply known or served. Remember, what surprised you today? What inspired you today? What moved you or touched you today? Another favorite author of mine is Madeleine L'Engle. She wrote some amazing books for children, actually. And one of the quotes that she has that's quite powerful was simply, "The wounds, our wounds are where the light comes in." I think it can find us in many ways, but when we open ourselves, or when life opens us more intimately, more in ways that are specifically ours, the light gets in deeper. So that's what I wanted to share. It's a shorter service than we're used to, but I would offer you a blessing that may your broken pieces be of peace and the spark of God that you are. Thank you.